that Madam Rampel-Garner will start for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my questions to FinTech Canada. Thank you for coming here and for the work that you guys do. One of your member companies is Stripe, a payment processor, and in a series of articles this week, including one by the National Post, the long and the short of it is that Stripe has taken a posture in saying that it wouldn't pass the savings that were part of a deal reached by the government with Visa and MasterCards to lower the fee for small businesses. They wouldn't pass that along to their customers. One of the rationale on their website that they've used for this is that they said that their costs have increased, a 0.036 increase in standard pricing due to reintroduction of GST, HST taxes. If this is true, how come your other member companies that are payment processors haven't taken the same posture as Stripe?
It's a great question, and I think it's because a few things. Just because interchange fees are changing doesn't mean the overall pricing model of any given payment processor has to change. That's because the market for payment processing, especially credit cards, is fairly competitive, fairly well developed, and there's a lot of differentiation in the market. Firms don't just compete with each other on the basis of price, they also compete with each other on the basis of value added.
So can I back up just on something you said? So you said that payment processors aren't obligated to pass that savings along. Why do you think that the government didn't mandate the passing of savings along? I guess for me it seems like a bit of a shell game if these savings are supposed to be passed along to small businesses and then they're not. They're essentially just going to cover the operating costs or the profit of these payment processors. So why do you think that the government didn't elect to say this must be passed along through payment processors?
So I'd be speculating. I wasn't talking to the government about why they didn't mandate the pass-through.
Did any of your member companies take a posture to ask you to ensure that the government would not pass any savings along? Did any of your member companies say we need to make sure that the government doesn't force us to pass these savings along to our customers?
No.
Okay. Has this ever come up in any discussions with any of your member companies and any of your executive?
Occasionally we will talk about the various issues that are going on, but the debit and credit card code of conduct is not something that we've been asked to engage on, and it's not something we had a seat at the table in. Okay. We focus primarily on other issues in the financial sector, mostly payments modernization and open banking.
Thank you. Senior Liberal fundraiser, Mark Carney, he just put out a large fundraising ask for the Liberal government. He's rumored to be a leadership contender and has now been appointed to be a senior economic advisor without any sort of firewall. Have you ever had any interaction with Mr. Carney?
No.
Okay. Has he, are you aware of any advocacy that he has made on behalf of Stripe for this particular issue?
I'm not.
Okay. As far as the rest of your member companies are concerned, I would be, if I was sitting on one of their boards, I'd be concerned that this line of questioning is coming up in this committee. Do you think it's problematic that we now have a narrative that could potentially involve lobbying of a senior Liberal fundraiser and one of your member companies, and the fact that they're not passing savings along? Do you see that as potentially problematic from an ethics perspective?
I don't know how to answer the question from an ethics perspective, but I often find it unfortunate when complicated issues are simplified to a point where they can't really be understood for what they are. The thing about the market for payment processing that I think is understood by experts. I mean, the Competition Bureau recently put out a report a few years ago on innovation in the financial sector. And one of the things that report said is that the market for payment processing is quite competitive.
But would you say that it's fair to say that in some cases, particularly Stripe, the decision that the government made to, reach that deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees, that it's now being absorbed by payment processors like Stripe, as opposed to being realized by small business owners?
I think I understand what you're asking. I think in a lot of cases, there are some savings being passed on to merchants, but in a lot of cases, the pricing, like the overall pricing of a payment processor is not just based on the interchange fee. There are so many other things that payment processors do.
Just with the time I have left, do you think that the government should have had included payment processors like Stripe in their decision or in this deal that they reached with Visa and MasterCard, if the true motivation was actually to see savings be realized by small businesses?
I think the government should have invited more stakeholders to the table to talk about the implications of what they did.
That's fair. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being so respectful of time, MP Rempel-Garner. So directly 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions will be for the Executive Director of FinTech, the association representing, at least for the case of this study, the processors. Just so everyone who's watching is clear here, when somebody uses their credit card in a physical store, retail store, they don't know in most cases, because it's only seen to the business, somewhere between 1.5% to 3% additional charge on the total value of that credit card is charged to the business. Is that correct?
Yes, there is an amount charged to the business, and Canadians aren't aware unless they know for one reason or another. For example, some businesses might choose to surcharge.
Okay. Thank you. And included in that is a whole bunch of things, but that's set by, in this case, we're talking about Visa, MasterCard, and then there are elements of that are what are called the interchange fees, which are fees related to the actual pipes, as I call it, the plumbing of the companies that actually do all that processing, and those are your members, correct?
We have some members on the acquiring side processing payments for merchants and facilitating the use of those pipes, as you described it.
So when I look down the list, I think of your members. Chase Merchant Services, they're one of your members?
They aren't a member, but we do have various very
okay, and they've agreed to the discount. The government a year and a half ago announced that there would be a 9.95%, 1% essentially reduction in those rates. It's taken us a year and a half to get to this point where 2 weeks ago they announced it. So Chase is participating. Global Payments, are they one of yours members? They're agreed. Moneris, they're one of your members? No. Square?
They're a member.
TD Merchant Services, not one of yours. Okay, so all those have agreed. Apparently, Fiserv, are they one of your members? They have not responded to any requests. Do you know what Fiserv's going to do?
I don't know what Fiserv is.
How about Nuvei?
I'm not sure what they're.
Are they one of your members?
Yes.
They haven't responded. People's Trust?
They're a member.
They're one of your members. Do you know what they're going to do? No. PSP Services, Inc.
SP Services.
PSP Services, Inc. Are they one of your members? No. Okay. So what we have here is 5 companies that have agreed, only one of which I think is yours. A number of your members who have not responded to the public announcement, meaning presumably, since they won't respond, they're not going to pass on these savings. And members, one member of yours, Stripe, which has publicly said they're not going to pass it on. So it sounds like most of your members aren't going to pass on the savings. Is that correct?
The ones who have not responded and have yet to elucidate what they're going to do, I don't know what they're going to do.
Okay, so maybe we should get them before the committee to explain why they haven't responded. So when a company, one of your members, doesn't pass the savings on, what happens to that Visa or MasterCard merchant fee? Does it go down?
So it depends on what sorts of services the merchant chooses to get. There are different pricing regimes for these kinds of payments.
But the government's making a claim here that there's going to be this massive savings for for businesses and small businesses with this fee. Yet most of your members aren't willing to pass it on. So if they're not willing to actually reduce their fees, then how is the savings going to get passed on? Isn't this a fake release in the sense that most of your members aren't actually going to agree with the government, including one of the companies whose board member is the de facto finance minister of this government?
So again, I don't know what the ones who have not yet responded are going to do. But in some cases, the savings being promised might not actually come to fruition because the market for payment processing is much more complicated than an interchange fee. Just because you reduce an interchange fee doesn't mean other elements of that overall price are automatically going to fluctuate too. In some cases, some costs might go up. In a lot of cases, payment processors today compete with each other not just by reducing prices, but by offering value-added services, inventory management, stuff related to fraud detection and prevention, making it seamless, automated reconciliation. These sorts of things aren't going to be affected by an interchange fee.
So more than half or most of your members aren't committing to do this, yet the government claims it's actually going to reduce fees. If your members aren't going to reduce their fees, how do small business fees actually go down for credit card fees?
So the way...
If I don't subscribe to Moneris or one of these others.
The way you reduce payment fees is by introducing competition in the market for payment services, not by trying to micromanage one element of a big bundle of prices.
So the government's attempt to micromanage this one element isn't working and isn't going to work.
In some cases, it may not.
That's an incredible revelation, because we also have the CFIB claiming wildly that this is going to happen, when it appears that most of their members aren't going to see this benefit based on the fact that your members aren't willing to pass this on. And I presume MasterCard and Visa are not going to eat that savings that is required of the interchange fee just to be good people.
So I just wanted to be clear. I don't know what decisions many of the members will land on. I can't speak to whether they will or will not pass on the fees. As an association focused on public policy, we don't talk about these sorts of commercial matters.
Merci beaucoup.
Much. Mr. Annis, you stated earlier that the government did not consult sufficiently as to the agreements with issuers, providers of credit cards, etc. What have been the repercussions of that non-consultation or poor consultation?
It's a great question. I do think they probably under-consulted. Like I said, we as an association were not consulted. We didn't have a chance to provide our perspective on how to best achieve the government's goals. I think the effect of this has been a policy that isn't achieving the results the government wanted to achieve. Like I said, you can't affect the overall price of something by micromanaging a tiny component of that price.
Essentiellement, ce que vous dites, c'est...
Well, essentially, you're saying that the government did not consult sufficiently or adequately, and so, as I was saying to my colleague, Mr. Perkins, there's a small percentage of the costs that have been reduced, but others, like Stripe, we don't intend to, or they just haven't reduced their costs, because that's what the value of our service is. So there's been no real gains. The Prime Minister has just tweeted just a few moments ago that the government is quite proud because if you go get a coffee at Tim Hortons or somewhere else, the money should be provided to the merchant. So it's not quite consistent with what you've just said.
I didn't get a question in the translation.
Essentially, the PM had just said in one of his tweets that he was happy that his government had created this agreement with various partners so that the enterprises would getting more money when they sell a cup of coffee. But what you've said isn't exactly reflective of what is actually going to happen.
In some cases, in some cases, depending on the pricing the merchant chooses, there may not be a change in the price. So, yes, there are nuances here that might be missed in some of the more political communication around this.
Vous avez aussi dit que plusieurs autres.
You've also stated that in other countries or in other areas of the world, regulations are in existence that allow to have open service and be more effective, so to increase competition. Can you name some of these countries?
Okay, they have a real-time payment system and open banking. One of our members is a global fintech company. When the UK modernized this payment system and gave fintechs access to it, the moment they integrated into that system, they were able to cut their average cost of payment by 20%. That's just immediately upon connecting, and they were able to increase the movement of the speed of the movement of funds to seconds. It happened in real time, more or less. The cost of an open banking payment is also a fraction of the cost of a credit card transaction from the merchant's perspective. This is also something that exists in Europe. This is something that exists in Australia. Canada is one of the only advanced economies not to have made progress on these things yet.
Pourtant, le gouvernement a annoncé dans son budget.
But the budget did announce in a budget statement, either this year or last year, that they were going to create an environment to allow open banking in Canada. But do you think that the response has been adequate?
It wasn't too long ago when many in the sector thought it wasn't going to happen at all, despite all the consultation and the years and years of conversation. I think some of the excitement will be muted, though, because, as I said in my opening remarks, on day one, this will just allow Canadians to share their data. It won't allow Canadians to authorize someone else to initiate a payment on their behalf, either push the payment out or pull the money from one account into their own. That payment capability that is turned on in other jurisdictions like the United Kingdom, that would allow a merchant a way to encourage their customer to pay by something other than a credit card. So in addition to being able to surcharge, you'd be able to partner with a fintech and get money the way you want on the terms you want it. That in Canada is not going to be an option on day one. And it's not clear it'll be an option ever unless the scope of open banking is expanded.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you, Mr. Généreux. Mr. Patzer, we'll get back to you for 5 minutes.
To FinTech, in 2023, the Canadian Revenue Authority changed the definition of financial services to exclude credit card surcharge revenue, making these payments eligible for GST, HST. They weren't obviously eligible prior to this. This was done by creating a special exception in the Excise Tax Act. Because of this change, all credit card surcharges paid on or after March 29th, 2023 are now subject to GST and HST. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. On its website, Stripe said they wouldn't be passing along the savings from the Liberal announcement of their deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses due to, quote, their credit card processing in Canada for businesses on standard pricing increasing by 0.036%, primarily due to the recent reintroduction of GST, HST taxes for certain for certain card network scheme fees. So that change on GST, HST eligibility would probably have significantly eaten into Stripe's profits, right?
I can't speak to how profitable or not Stripe is, but in general, when you slap a tax on something, you're going to increase the cost of it.
For sure. It's possible that Stripe, or is it possible that Stripe isn't passing along the savings from the government's deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees to small businesses to offset the change in this GST, HST eligibility? Do you think that's possible?
I couldn't possibly comment on that. It might be.
Maybe.
Not.
Probably. Why, I can't see why not. So essentially what's happened here is that the government changed the definition of financial services to exclude credit card surcharge revenue, making these payments eligible for GST, HST, then turned around and made the deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses, but those savings really went to offset Stripe's loss in profit due to the tax change. Seems reasonable to conclude that, right? Wouldn't it?
It might.
For small businesses that use Stripe, the deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses is actually just a fake announcement. It went to offset Stripe's tax burden. I think that's basically what we're kind of getting from this meeting here today. And small businesses can just pass that burden on to the customers, right? I mean, if the payment company is absorbing those costs, forcing the small businesses to have to pay them, then they can then download that onto the consumer, right?
It's possible. How costs are passed along in this complicated chain depends on so many different things and which parties we're talking about. But in theory, someone has to pay the price of that tax.
Yeah. Someone's got to pay it in the end, and it's always the consumer always loses is generally how this works. Stripe made $16 billion in profit last year and processed a global payment volume of $1 trillion. Why do you think the government didn't force them to pass the savings from their deal with Visa and MasterCard along to small businesses?
I don't know why they didn't force the processors to pass along the cost. They probably did everything they could to do it. But I think any policymaker that looks at this market, their first reaction is going to be, wow, this is really complicated. We can't just go in and tell companies what prices to set and not expect any unintended consequences. The market for payments is multi-sided. You can't affect prices here without also affecting prices over here. You can't give merchants a break without costing consumers more. You can't give consumers a break without costing merchants more. The government has probably realized that this is a game of redistribution. We can't make everyone win here. And this is why the history of credit card policy in this country, to me, seems like that famous definition of insanity, where we do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. We've been through many voluntary agreements, probably because we've realized we can't regulate, we can't make everyone happy. So, our perspective as an association is let's stop the madness and focus on actually promoting competition and innovation in this space, because that's what's going to drive down costs for businesses and consumers.
So you think that there should be more competition in the space, correct? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying? Okay, because to me it's like, why would the government have to get involved in this space in the first place, right? Why are the payment companies not just lowering these rates on their own anyway? Why wouldn't they just do it on their own?
So in some spots they are, not in every spot though. The Competition Bureau's market study on this in 2017 concluded that when it comes to payment processing in the credit card market, competition is fairly strong. It's probably still fairly strong today. Just for kicks, I went on Shopify's website and looked at all the different payment processors they have integrations with. There were way too many to count. The market has also started competing along non-price-based margins. So they don't only say, I can give you a better deal. They say, I can also do your inventory management. I can do your reconciliation. I can handle your fraud. They're competing quite viciously with each other for market share. Where we don't see competition is when it comes to some other payment systems that could be used as a way to compete with credit cards. In particular, our national payment systems, that real-time rail that everyone keeps talking about. Access to that thing has been restricted and controlled by the biggest banks in the country, who happen to make a lot of money from credit cards. So I think in this country we have a governance problem in the payment system, and nothing the government is doing right now is addressing that. And I think that is actually what the problem is.
Yeah, because like when I look at, I pulled some small businesses in my home community over this last week, talking to them about some of the fees that they paid in regards to Visa, MasterCard, Interac. grant now small sample, but basically when I factored out across the city of Swift Current, for example, 18,000 people, there was a couple hundred businesses in our town, very entrepreneurial city. Over a year, we're probably looking at close to $500,000 leaving the local economy just in fees alone, and that was just only on one aspect of fees. When you add all the other fees that are baked in there, we're probably over $1 million in fees leaving the local economy going to payment tech. Do you think that's reasonable?
I think overall, the cost of sending payments in this country and receiving them is probably higher than it needs to be. EY released a report a few years ago that estimated overall, like when we look across all the different payment instruments, the cost of sending and receiving money costs Canadian businesses $14 to $32 billion every 5 years. That's a non-trivial portion of GDP, and there's a lot more we can do to bring that down.
Thank you very much, MP Patzer. Just, you said 14 to 32 billion every 5 years? That's correct. Okay, thank you. I'll now turn it over to MP Perkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up a bit on my colleague, Mr. Patzer's questions, just to make sure everyone's clear on this thing. So the Liberal Minister of Revenue in 2023 changes the rules and allows the credit card processing fees now to be included in the GST, HST charges where they weren't before, correct? That's what you confirmed. And this happened about the same time, I think, that the announcement was made in May 2023 that by the Minister of Finance that we would have this miraculous reduction in credit card payment processing fees for small business. Both happened at the same time. And I accept what you said, absolutely. Somebody's got to pay. This is a service. It's being offered. And the question is, where does it get charged? How does it flow through? And as part of that change, small businesses were allowed to do something they weren't allowed to do before, which is to pass that fee on to consumers on the transaction, and the GST and HST could be paid on that. Do you have any idea what the estimate was that that new revenue source would present to the federal government in HST revenue?
I do not.
Okay, well, there are estimates from accounting firms that it's about $160 million. So this change seems to benefit the government, and that'll grow, obviously, as transactions grow, as value grows, that HST component that the government gets will grow. That's the beauty of the GST for the government, is that it grows as the economy grows. So as those transactions grow, that number of 160 million will grow. So that change gets made. And then what we have is we have a situation that says, oh, well, we're going to do this announcement that says we're going to lower credit card fees, or the processing fees for credit cards. And a lot of your members aren't agreeing to pass it on. Doesn't seem clear that anyone will pass it on. Is that correct? Except for the ones that have already committed to the government, which are about 4 or 5 companies, which aren't all, or most of them aren't your members.
I can't speak on who's decided to pass it on and who hasn't, because I'm not entirely sure myself at this point.
Well,